I'm Carrie Bourne. I'm from the Office of Continuing Education at UW-Whitewater, and we've been hosting the Fairhaven Lecture Series here at Fairhaven Senior Services since 1983. So this fall, we'll celebrate 40 years with you guys, and we're very proud of that partnership. But this semester, we've been focusing on our new faculty. We have a lot of new faculty and staff across all the different departments and colleges, and we're getting to hear a lot of different things about what they study. And today's might be one of the most exciting, I think, for sure. So let me introduce today's speaker. Michelle Damien received her PhD at the University of Southern California and is an assistant professor of history at UW-Whitewater. She specializes in Japanese maritime history and archaeology and has authored chapters in the volumes Land, Power, and the Sacred, The Estate System in Medieval Japan from the University of Hawaii Press, and Historical and Archaeological Perspectives on Early Modern Colonialism in Asia Pacific from the University of Florida Press, among other publications. Michelle has worked and studied in Japan for over 9 years, and her current research focuses on 14th to 16th century Japanese maritime-based trade networks, tracing the movements of both people and commodities in the Seto Island Sea region. She is also on the board of directors for the nonprofit Museum of Underwater Archaeology, and one of her first archaeological diving projects was in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. Michelle, at UW-Whitewater, Michelle teaches classes on Asian history, global history, and maritime archaeology. Please welcome Michelle Damien.
This is on? Okay, great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm really excited to be able to talk about some of my favorite stuff. And as Carrie mentioned, my first official training as a graduate student in underwater archaeology, we had a field school right close by, Two Rivers, Wisconsin. So I never thought I would be teaching in Wisconsin, so I feel really great about coming full circle and being able to talk with you about all of this. So yeah, today's going to be just kind of an introduction to the field of maritime archaeology, talking a little bit about what we do. I like things to be interactive, so I'm going to be asking you all to shout things out and do a little bit of archaeological analysis yourself later on, so hopefully you'll get into some of the artifacts there. So first of all, I wanted to start out with what is maritime archaeology? And there's a couple other words that could maybe use and have been used: underwater archaeology, naval archaeology. Anybody want to take a guess as to why I use the term maritime archaeology? Anything with boats? Yeah, so why I'm using maritime instead of naval or underwater or something like that. Absolutely. Anything with boats is going to be part of this for sure. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Trade. Yeah. Maritime encompasses more than just the boats themselves. That's certainly part of it. Sorry, the mic is kind of wobbling here. The boats are certainly a big part of it, but it's more than just the boats. Naval is usually it's kind of like military on the sea, Navy related. Nautical is usually just boats, and not everything is underwater in maritime archaeology. A lot of it is. Scuba diving on shipwrecks, that's what I say that I do when I'm introducing my field in brief. I scuba dive on shipwrecks. This is here in Lake Michigan, but there's also other things besides shipwrecks. There's submerged settlements. I was talking in my class earlier today about an area in Japan that I've got 2 maps for, one in the early 1500s and one in the late 1500s. And there's a whole section in the late map that's gone. It's just that land is not there anymore, and it turns out in the mid-1500s there was a big earthquake. So that land has toppled into the water. Someday I'm going to dive on that. I haven't been able to yet, but someday I will. So submerged settlements are part of what we can find underwater. The maritime landscape becomes part of what we think of when we think about maritime archaeology. So it's not just people who are sailing those ships are not at sea 24/7, 365 days a year. They've got to come on land. So what kind of infrastructure is there on land? Docks, wharves. This is a particular place in Japan, and you can see here, I hope, that there's a pagoda. These become navigational markers as people are sailing in. They see that taller building there, and it guides them in. That's part of the maritime landscape. Things like fishing gear. These are ancient prehistoric fishing weights. This is part of the things that you would find both on the seashore, that contribute to our understanding of maritime lifestyles. And then, like I said, not everything is on land, is underwater. Things like lighthouses are part of the maritime landscape. So by using the term maritime instead of, again, naval or nautical or underwater, maritime casts the net widely. And I get to study all of these things, and we get to work with all of these things to understand the overall maritime culture of a place. So this is overall what we do. Most of today, I'm going to be talking about how we do it, how we do what we do. And we're pretty much, any archaeological process can be brought into these 6 steps: research, search and survey, recording and mapping your site, analyzing the objects in the site itself, conserving the artifacts, we'll talk more about that in a minute, and then interpretation. Everything that we do, we have to get the information out to people about it. So that is in some ways the most important part of what we do. So, beginning with research. For every hour we spend in the field, underwater, doing the excavations, we spend about 10 hours in the library. You've got to, when you're trying to start a project, you need to know where you're going to look. That's going to be the first step to all of this. So the research part of it is important. And we use a variety of sources to be doing this research. And I should say, too, by the way, if anybody at any point has any questions or anything while I'm talking, please feel free, raise your hand, ask questions. Like I said, more than happy to welcome all of that. But, we look at books, we're reading through our scholarly sources, but we also do archival research. We get a lot of information from things like newspapers or other similar documents. Like we have here, fire drives women and crew to boats, and this schooner sank in Massachusetts Bay. So that gives us a clue. This is one of the things that we're going to look for. They're one of the places that we could narrow down our search for. Talking with local authorities can also be a really important part of that research process. This is an image from a site in North Carolina that I worked on, and it's called a ship's graveyard. People tend to abandon ships in the same kind of place, because they're someplace that's not going to be a navigation hazard, but someplace that's going to be not so far away that it's going to take them forever to haul the ship off and get rid of it. So there tend to be a lot of ships that are abandoned in the same general area. So this was one of the ships in the ship's graveyard that we were looking at. And so I talked with the North Carolina branch of underwater archaeology. It's part of the civil service there, part of a government-based organization. And they had some documentation, some of these pictures from 1990 about this ship that was abandoned. Now, we were working there in 2006, and that's how my same ship looked like. This is the before, and this is the after. So, yeah, a lot of deterioration. And in combining with some of the archival sources and some of the oral histories that we were talking to with people in the area, it turns out, I think you can see here, we've got a lot of this upper decking is gone. You've got some metal pieces in the back, totally gone there. Obviously very overgrown when I was there. But it turns out that there was a robust salvage group in that area. And they would go and they would strip a lot of the wood off of these abandoned boats and use them to make floors. Yeah. There is apparently a whole office building on the other side of this river area that had all of its floors were coming from the boats. And the same thing with the metal pieces, recovering those, melting them down, salvaging them. So by being able to compare that before and after, we see just how much damage the salvage has been doing to this area, to these ships. And when we're thinking about things like, do we want to put preservation laws in place? Are these historically significant enough to try and put on the National Register of Historic Places or something? This history of damage can become pretty important. So local informants in that way are useful. can also get a surprising amount of information from cemeteries, gravestones. This is in a graveyard in Two Rivers, and it's a memorial there in memory of the 8 unknown victims of the ill-fated steamer Vernon, foundered off Two River Point, October 28th, 1887. So we know that there's a shipwreck off of Two Rivers Point. We know how many people were lost. We get some information from this. Cemeteries can also be really fascinating to wander around, again, with that maritime landscape idea and understanding the maritime influences. It's amazing if you're in a seaside or lakeside or riverside cemetery, how many grave markers have anchors on them, have ships, have compass roses. These maritime connections are important enough to people to memorialize for everybody else to see. It was very fascinating. Sometimes you get really interesting kind of local informants. This is off of Maine, the coast of Maine, and just somebody wrote, Annie C. McGuire shipwrecked here, Christmas 1886. So, all right, well, that's helpful. You never know what's gonna pop up. So you do all of your archival research, and then you've narrowed down the place that you want to do your survey for. So then you go into the next step, that search and survey. So I know that this is my patch of ocean, say that I want to survey on. We call it mowing the lawn. We get on a boat, and we've got our equipment with us, and I'll talk about the equipment in a second, but we just go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and we hope that we pick something up. And inevitably, it's like the last day of field work that you're like, oh, here it is. That's great. But we've got our equipment with us, and this mowing the lawn aspect of it, you're just recording data at first and seeing, okay, where are things that are likely to be our shipwreck? Because it's not always easy to see. I have most of the archaeological diving that I've done has been in what we call blackwater diving, which I can't see, diving by braille. And so, we're very reliant on all of these other technology in order to be able to tell us where we should be doing our diving. One of the major pieces of equipment that we use is called a magnetometer. And as the name implies, it's reading magnetic fields. And so this is very useful when we are looking at metal ships, the metal that's on a ship. If it's a wooden ship, a lot of times this would pick up cannon, this would pick up anchors, some of the metal that would be present on the ship. So the readout here, the more lines, the closer together, that's how intense your magnetic field is. So if I'm seeing something like this, kind of far apart, maybe not a lot of metal present on there, this might signify, like I said, a cannon, an anchor, some major metal presence there. So we'd probably put a little mark as we're going back and forth. We'd take a GPS reading and we'd say, okay, this has got a lot of metal potential here. This might be worth jumping in and diving on. We don't want to rely just on that, though, because there's a lot of variables. So another thing that we use is called side scan sonar. And sonar, again, as the name implies, it's sending out acoustic waves, and those waves are going down off of the sonar, and they are pinging off anything that is sitting up on the ocean floor. So anything that's buried, this is not going to pick up. The magnetometer might pick up metal that's buried, but the side scan sonar will not, because it's not making, it doesn't have a topography. It's not sitting up off the ocean floor. But if it does hit something, then those acoustic waves get pinged back, and it reads out as what's called an acoustic shadow. And I'm going to show you a couple of these side scan sonar readouts in just a second. But one thing to be aware of when I am showing you these readouts is that you can see right underneath this piece of equipment, it's not reading it. The acoustic waves are going out from either side, so there's a dead spot right in the middle. Now, if you're mowing the lawn, then you're getting overlap, and so you're not missing that area. But a couple of the images that I'm going to show you do have a line right down the center. That's what that is. So, here's the first interactive part. What are we looking at here? Shipwreck. Yeah, this one's pretty straightforward. You can see, of course, the bow of the ship. You get a sense of that shadow that's being cast here. Have maybe some holds for the cargo, maybe some damage, but this one's pretty straightforward. It's actually a wooden schooner. What are we looking at here? And this, again, this is that dead spot there. So that's not like a fiber optic cable or anything like that. That's that dead spot under the sonar. Anybody want to take a guess?
Gold.
Gold, I wish. Sadly, it is not gold. For the record, I've never found gold on a shipwreck site. I know, right? Cannonball? Yeah, kind of looks like the pathway that a cannonball took. This is maybe a little anticlimactic. This is sand, like the ripples that you see on the ocean floor. That's how sensitive some of the sonar is. It'll pick up the waves of the sand. It's sending that shadow out. Got it? Okay. What was that? Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, just thought there was a question. What are we looking at here? This might be a little unexpected for something that you're thinking of underwater. But I heard somebody shout out.
Anchor.
It definitely looks like an anchor, but one of the keys here is the scale. 16 meters long, it's what, 40 feet-ish? What did I hear? You're very, very close. You said an airplane? It's a helicopter. Boats are not the only things that sink. Sometimes we do get airplanes, we get helicopters, we get different things underwater. And so I think you can see, now that I've said helicopter, hopefully you see the blades of the helicopter here and the body of it. What about this one? Here, the key is really the shadow. So remember that this is standing up, the sonar is hitting, and the shadow is being cast.
Looks like a bike.
It is. It's a bicycle. Again, not everything that we find are shipwrecks, for sure. But all of this does tell us something about the people nearby, what they're throwing out or what is falling off of boats, maybe. What about this one? This is another kind of trick one, I'll forewarn you. Fish. Yep. Our side scan sonars will also pick up fish. Helpful if you're, and actually this is a tool that fishermen use very, very often as well, is this sort of sonar. Maybe not side scan, but sonar. Last one. Again, that center area is that dead spot. No guesses? Coral is a good guess. And it's definitely one that, especially like this area up here, right? Kind of looks like coral. The thing here that's confusing part is the shadow. These are very, very tall shadows being cast by this. Oh, kelp. Yeah, nobody has said that before. That's a really good potential because, yeah, kelp and seaweed can get really, really tall. So maybe. We actually don't know.
Oh.
Tricking you, I'm sorry. But, yeah, sometimes we don't know. So, we see some of these images. We're like, what the heck actually is that? And so, again, that's something that we make a note of. Well, maybe we want to drop down and dive on this and see what is actually down there. So when you start layering all of this stuff, you've got your magnetometer readings, you've got your side scan sonar readings, it starts to narrow things down. And you can say, okay, if we've got the magnetometer is giving us a strong reading, we've got something interesting on the sonar readout, maybe this is someplace worth diving on. There's also technology that's called multi-beam sonar. And so on this, you'll notice there's no dead spot here. This has got multiple beams sending out those acoustic waves. and bringing stuff back in. These are really expensive. I have never been able to work with one of these because they're really expensive, but they make really amazing underwater pictures. This is a multi-beam sonar readout. So if you can have that technology, fantastic. But like I said, wanted to throw that out there that it exists, but I've never used it. Yes?
Now, is this ship above the floor of the ocean?
Correct. Here's the floor of the ocean, and the ship is lying on its side. So.
There was an author who did a lot of underwater fiction, but he spent all of his money on researching and finding ships that were scuttled. Let's say they were running guns or something during the Civil War.
Clive Cussler?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. He's a fascinating person. I'm sorry he's passed away. I'm sorry I never had the chance to interact with him. But yeah, because he just wanted to find them.
Yeah, he wasn't going to salvage or something.
No, he would find it. He found the Hunley, the first submarine to sink a ship in warfare, and he was just like, great, found it. State of North Carolina, it's your problem now. And then the Hunley's a fascinating story, but
well, so many of them that he found had been almost buried with the movement of the water and the silt.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is why we use these multiple things to try and find them, because you're right, the Hunley was buried, and so the multi-beam or even the regular side scan really would not have shown it in any useful manner. But it's understanding with the magnetometer and everything else that he knew to look. So that's cool. That's cool that you brought him up. All right, so we've done our research, we've surveyed, we've found our site. The next step to do is map it. Archaeology is inherently destructive. You find a site and you dig, or if you're underwater, you may have to dredge out the sand that's covering something. And so as soon as you start to do that, you have disturbed the site. It will never be exactly the same as it was the way you found it. So that's why the very, very first thing that we do is to map it, to make sure that we know where everything is on the site, so that we can reconstruct things as best as possible. So the most common way of doing this is baseline mapping. I'm not an artist, and I'm definitely not a digital artist, so imagine that this football thing is a boat, please. And you're looking at it from top down. So you take a measuring tape, basically, and you run it down the middle of your boat, and you make an underwater grid, usually about every 10 feet or so. Or actually, if our boat is 10 feet, so every foot or so, you would have a cross piece there. And so when you have your baseline, then you can not only map the stuff that is part of the boat itself, but if you've got an artifact or something that you want to make a note of, or a part of the ship construction that is of particular interest that you want to record. So you have that there, and then you take additional measuring tapes, and you're going off of known points. And there's actually something called Mylar, and that is basically underwater paper. And I have my dive gear up here, and we can take a look at that later on. But basically, every time I go underwater on one of these, I have a clipboard, and I slide a piece of this Mylar on the clipboard, and I take notes. And so you can write underwater with this, and you bring it back up, and then you transfer it to regular paper immediately so that you can still read your own handwriting, because it's sometimes tough underwater as you're being blown back and forth with the current. So you're mapping, like I said, every single thing that you find down there that may be of some sort of interest. Sometimes you can't put a baseline down there. Maybe there's something, trees have fallen on top of it, or maybe it's in two different parts or something like that. Or one time that I dive in Blackwater a fair amount, we couldn't see the measuring tape. We couldn't see that very easily. So to get around that, you use a different technique called triangulation. You have 3 known points, and you know how far apart those 3 known points are from each other. So if I have those measurements accurately, then I can go from those external points and I can map. I can say the exact same way. I'm just taking the measurements from each of those external points, and that way it will help me place my feature, whatever it is, on the bigger picture map. Yeah.
When you say black water, is that because you're super deep, or is that because there's a lot of
Silt and stuff. River diving and some shoreline diving is just, if you're lucky, it's like you're diving in tea, because you can see a little bit. And if you're unlucky, you're just feeling stuff around. There was one site that I was on off the coast of Delaware that we were mapping an icebreaker. It was something in the harbor, but it was kind of lost over time. They didn't know the exact location, so we found it, and we were mapping it. And it was me and my dive buddy. So you always go down with a dive buddy. You never dive alone, because things can go wrong, and you want somebody there. And with your mapping, you need somebody to hold one end of the measuring tape, and you need somebody to just swim out to your feature and hold the other end. So that one was so dark that one of us would hold the one end, my dive buddy swam to the end of the icebreaker, whatever we were doing, found the end. He would tug a couple of times to let me know, okay, good, got the measurement. We swam up and surfaced and looked at the number on the measuring tape. That way, I mean, we could not see a thing. So yeah, sometimes it's fun. So there are some challenges to this. So when you're mapping a site, what to record, pretty much you record everything that is on this image. So you would be recording, of course, your contours of the boat, any features on the boat, all of these planks you would be recording, but you're also recording the stuff kind of off to the side. You're also recording stuff that might be trash. Got a tire on here. Because you just never know. You never know until you come up and start doing the analysis and the research for the artifacts on the vessel. You really don't know what's important. You don't know necessarily what are called primary, secondary, and tertiary, third-hand associations. Primary associations are parts of the ship that are still attached to the ship. You know that that's part of the original site then. Secondary are parts of the ship that are called disarticulated. They're no longer attached to the ship. Probably the same ship, probably from this, possibly not. Tertiary are items that you don't know. They could have drifted in. I have a friend who was working on a Civil War wreck and found a little G.I. Joe figure. This stuff drifts underwater, and you can't always know, when and where it came from. So you record everything. And then in that process, you determine what artifacts you want to bring up, what artifacts you want to leave there, and we can talk later in the Q&A if you want about kind of how we make some of those determinations, what we sell, what we bring up, what we leave. But that's part of this whole analytical process. So for our purposes here today, let's say that we have decided to record and recover some of our artifacts. The first thing that we're going to do, we've got this whole site plan, and this, incidentally, this is the wreck that I worked on in Two Rivers. So it was a huge bulk carrier. It was the size of a football field. But the first thing that you do when you're all done with your mapping, you create a plan of the site. And this is obviously the ship kept going, but you can see some of the features that we were recording, some things that look like they're not part of the wreck, some of the debris field, it's a stem post. But then our next step is to analyze the artifacts that we have. And so I'm going to ask you all to analyze some artifacts now. I've got some small items, and they are replicas. These are not actually from a shipwreck site, but they are very, very typical of the types of things that you would find on a wreck site. So, if you are willing, you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but if you are willing, I will pass out a couple of artifacts and give you a couple minutes to really kind of look at them, touch them, think about what they represent, what they might be. Some of them will be obvious. Some of them won't be so obvious. Couple of you have cheat sheets because there's a couple things that I'd like to ask you to interpret. But I'm going to take a minute and pass these out. I don't have one for everybody, I'm sorry. So like every 3 or 4 people will be able to get an artifact. Who had the chance to look at a piece that looked like this? Okay. What did you observe about it? What are your thoughts about these items?
We decided that it sat up because the design was up.
Okay.
And it had like a lip on it, not that one, the other one.
Okay. Oh, yep. Okay, so you've got the orientation. What for those people who haven't seen it, what's it made out of?
It's a thick pottery with a pretty substantial glaze, but 2 kinds of glaze.
Excuse me.
The outside is more decorative, whereas the inside is utilitarian.
Okay. So we've got something pottery, some decorations, some partly maybe being used for something utilitarian. What about those of you who looked at the other piece? Observations on that? People in the back, I think, saw that. Anything to add? Yeah.
Well, somebody did some artwork there.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's some kind of a, you might call it a decorative piece.
Okay. Yeah. Decorative and same thing, a bit of pottery there too. Awesome. Good observations. Who had this one? Or who got the chance to look at this one? Okay. Observations on that?
Porcelain.
Porcelain?
Yeah, the
Okay.
radius of it's probably off a bowl.
Okay.
And I don't know, is it English or?
No, it's a Kita.
Okay, so some hypotheses here. I like it. So porcelain, probably from a bowl, maybe English, maybe Akita ware, which is a Japanese ware. Okay, potentials. Yeah.
I thought that one looked like a piece of blue Delft or China.
Yep. So again, China porcelain. Could it be Delft? Is this from Europe or is this from Asia? Unsure by just looking at it. But good. These are all the kinds of analyses that you need and the questions that you need to be asking. Who had? I think over here had. I only gave you the one, but yeah. What did you guys observe from this?
That one, the one on the top, a pot,
Okay. What makes you think that?
the curve.
Okay.
I'm thinking of, the kind of red pots we buy now for our flowers.
Okay. Yeah. Kind of a terracotta kind of look. Yeah. Something maybe a little bit curved, so a piece of a pot. And I didn't give out the second one, but it's pretty much the same kind of thing. Okay. And so be keeping all this in mind. We're going to come back to all of these shortly. Who had one of these? Okay, had a few over there. I think this group first for these 3. What did you observe?
Chicken bone?
Chicken bones.
I think it's like a leg bone off a cat or a rabbit. I don't know.
Okay, maybe a leg bone off of a small mammal. Okay. Anything else you observed about the bones? Okay. What about our other bone? I think somebody over there. Yeah.
Somebody said it looked like what they had for supper.
Exactly. Yeah. Looks like a pork rib, doesn't it? Yeah. And something is really hard to see, but there's a little, I think I have it on the wrong view for the photo for the pork rib. But if you look closely at some of the chicken bones, you might see some slash marks in there or something. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So what might that indicate to you? If you've got a little, I heard something? Yeah, exactly. Again, we are using the artifacts ultimately to learn about people. So these marks, probably a cut mark. Somebody's eaten this chicken. So last night's supper, right? We've got that kind of idea going on here. Okay. Who had this one? Okay. What did you observe about this?
The top of a bottle,
Okay. Yeah.
or medicine or whatever.
Okay, yeah, not sure what it's used for, but the glass top of a bottle neck, wine neck, who knows? What about this one? Anybody have this one? Okay. Any observations about that? Okay, yeah. If you look really closely, you've got some Asian writing on the base here. Also glass, kind of cloudy, maybe has been in the water for a while, but some Asian writing on there. Great. Who had these?
We've got the one on the top.
Okay. Okay. What do you think that is?
Well, we all have different ideas, we don't.
Okay.
Well, at first, I thought a brick, except for it's not as dense.
Okay.
You know, not as wide
Mhm.
as a modern day brick, but I was thinking
Okay. So possibly,
something man-made.
yeah, definitely man-made. Good. Possibly brick. What were some of the other hypotheses that were being?
I thought maybe it was something rubble that it was dumped on, happened to be dumped on the site.
Oh, okay.
Well, some mentioned a chimney, which was a good, like if someone was replacing a chimney and they dumped it in.
Okay. Yeah. So either jettisoned or maybe bringing stuff to build a chimney or something. Yeah. Great. Other thoughts, observations? Did the other two brick pieces get out there? Or the other two of these pieces get out there, I should say? No? Okay. And again, we'll come back to all of this. Who had the coin?
I did.
Okay. Observations?
Looks like it was from the Tongzi Emperor region, 1861 to 1875.
Okay. He had a cheat sheet, by the way. He didn't know that off the top of his head, or I assume. Okay. So Tongji Emperor from, and you've got some dates on there too, right? Yep. Awesome. So again, this is an Asian coin here, so you can see the Chinese characters on there. So should maybe be starting to think of seeing some associations here, maybe. Yes.
It's out of your field, but do you happen to know why their coins had holes in them?
I do, actually, and it is actually kind of related to this. The currency units, you would pay for something in what were called strings of cash. So through those holes, you'd put a string and you'd put, X number of coins on there. So instead of handing you 100 coins, I would hand you one string of cash. So, and a lot of times they become used as ballast. Japan in the pre-modern era decides that they want to import a lot of these Chinese coins. They're heavy. They sit on the bottom of the boat. And so they become a good stabilizing piece of cargo for Japan to import from China. So, yeah. Okay. And I think almost our last one. Okay. All right. Did you have both of them or?
Just the one.
Okay. Okay.
Button, and on the other side, it looks like it's a mother of pearl.
Okay, so maybe a mother of pearl button. Good. Who? Anybody have the other one?
That looks
I
like
think that's okay. Yep.
I think this is a section of a long bone.
Okay. So again, maybe.
I can't tell whether it's human or animal.
Okay. So.
But it's not a flat bone.
Okay. Yeah. So some kind of long bone, maybe.
Long bone like the ulnar.
Okay. All right. So perhaps I will let you know none of the bones are human. No humans were harmed in the making of this presentation. But certainly some kind of animal matter making this button here. Good. People don't always get that, so good. Last one, I think. Okay, what did you observe about these?
I have a cheat sheet,
Yes.
but machine cut 1830s to present. There's a more broad side, both flat, and the side pieces are flat. And the other thing is, you run into nails like this in buildings as well.
Yep. You see a lot of similar kinds of things being used on boats as you do on land. So you have these, this one is the machine cut one. Did you have the other one too?
I do.
Okay.
And to me, it looks like a 3-penny nail, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, this is called it's a wire cut nail. And so same thing. This one, the cheat sheet was shorter, so I threw it up on here too. But you've got different types of nails that are being used over the years. And so you get a rough sense of when your ship was made. So now that you've all kind of gotten an introduction as to the types of artifacts that you would find on a boat, a typical shipwreck site, then you've identified them, you've looked at the individuals, then you start seeing how they work together. So we had 2 items with dates on them. We had, what was the date for the?
1861 to 1875.
1861 to 1875.
Mine was 1830s and then 1850s to present.
Okay. So we have a sense maybe as to the date of when our boat went down, right? So by putting together these artifacts, associating them together, we know that it can't have been before 1861 because this coin was started to be manufactured in 1861. So it can't be earlier than that, even though our nails could have been earlier than that. But the nails are used on many things, right? And the nails may last longer. So we have a sense maybe mid to late 1800s is when our boat went down, maybe, by associating all of the artifacts together. What do these artifacts together suggest to you? Yeah, we've got a lot of Asian stuff here. Yeah, possibly. We will definitely talk about that possibility in a minute. But, so we've got a Chinese coin. We've got some glass with some Asian writing on it. Going back to our earlier discussion of, is this English or is this Asian porcelain? Again, we don't necessarily know definitively for sure by just the analysis that we're doing here now, but the associations might suggest more of an Asian nature than the European nature. Unclear. So you're starting to see how we're doing this analysis, how we're connecting all of these dots. Then we put it back on the map. And now we're starting to associate not just the items, but where we're seeing them on the boat. So let's say that we've got in the same area on the boat, we've got the buttons, and the one that looked like bone, by the way, that's actually antler. It's deer antler. So, but bone is a very similar kind of look and feel to it. So you've got the kind of fancy buttons, you've got the coin, you got the fancy porcelains, all in one area. What does this suggest to you about the people on the boat?
Wealthy.
Yeah. You've got, depending on our quantities here, but you've got at least one person with some money probably, right? They've got some of the fancy porcelains, some actual money, maybe if that's the front of our boat. Yeah?
What's the coin worth, do you know?
This coin is a replica, so it is worth a quarter or so. But yeah. Surprisingly, there's a fair amount of these that are out there. I actually, a colleague of mine just was telling me that he went to Korea and bought a bunch of coins, and he asked me to identify them, and there was actually a real one of these in there. But I do think that the material may have been silver, so the silver itself is probably worth something. But they're from this particular time period, the mid 1800s, it's actually not as rare as you might think. So not priceless, sadly.
Well, what was the cost what was the value at the time?
That is a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry, that I'd have to look up. But.
Could that boat have been a vessel transporting a lot of items to a place?
That's definitely a possibility, and that's one of the questions that we should be asking. I've got a slide for that in just a second, giving you exactly that same scenario. But so let's say that we've got our wealthy person here, and now we've got our possibly terracotta flower pot kind of thing and some of the nails over in this other area. What might that suggest? Okay.
I looked it up. It comes from 1653.
Oh, okay. So maybe it might have been an earlier one there that would have been on our vessel too. Yeah. And if that's the case, if it was blue delft from that early, absolutely right that the time period would be a potential there. But if it is our wealthy person here, then that probably would have been a pretty valuable item. So yeah, absolutely a possibility. Any thoughts of what's going on in this other section of the boat? Yeah, if we're seeing a lot of this kind of utilitarian pottery here? And yeah, is this where they're storing the food? Is this where the crew is eating, as opposed to maybe our ship captain, perhaps? Now, kind of keeping in that same larder idea. Yep. You're kind of preempting what I had there, but absolutely. Now imagine that we've got the glass bottle top, we've got our chicken and our pork bones, and we've got some of the utilitarian pots. We're probably in the galley, right? This is the place where food is being prepared on the ship. Probably a wine bottle, if this case. Yep, exactly. And I meant to put up there, and I apparently didn't. This would also be the place where a lot of times you would find some of the bricks. Anybody know why? Possibly ballast, if you're finding it in great quantities. But if you, oven, exactly. You need to cook this food somewhere, and so you'd have your bricks in that back area too. Now what if we're finding lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of this porcelain, this fancy porcelain? Now what do you think? Maybe a dining room. If we're finding a lot, maybe this is cargo. Maybe this is what's being traded on our vessel. If we're finding, like I said, tons and tons and tons of it. But you can see, I hope through this, that it's this analysis that is really, really critical. And this is something, so the difference between archaeology versus sport divers who are maybe not as concerned with preserving the heritage here, but so they'll swim past and they see the coin and they grab it. They think, hey, cool, I got a souvenir off of this wreck, and so now the coin's gone. And somebody else swims by and takes away some of the pieces of pottery because maybe they weren't diving on the other ship, but the other part of the ship, but they're getting that pottery done. Somebody else grabs our Delft or our Akita ware. We're losing so much information when people do this. So now all of the analyses that you were just able to do with all of that information, this is all we have left.
Oh, I grabbed the button.
I don't think I erased the buttons off of this, but now we've got even less information if you're grabbing the buttons. So this is why archaeologists, we want to preserve what the information. We want to keep collections together. We want to make sure that we have all of that information in one place, fully recorded. So once we've recorded all of this, and running a little bit out of time here, so I'll go quickly through this. Conservation is an important part of the next step. If we have brought these artifacts up from underwater, imagine when you take a bath or are in a pool for a really long time, you prune up, right? And you get all wrinkly. Now these artifacts have been underwater for potentially hundreds of years. You can't just bring them up and put them on your mantelpiece. They will crack apart and crumble. You have things like going on here, this idea of concretions happen on metal objects where you get the silt and stuff from the area that concretes itself to it. So this item is before conservation. Treatment it undergoes to get rid of all of this exterior stuff. Turns out it was a bed spring, but we don't know that by just looking at the concretion. So you've got to go through the conservation conservation aspect of it. X-rays are often a first step. This is a piece of shot ammunition from the CSS Alabama. So the box was brought up, didn't know what was in it, had to do some X-rays in order to figure out what was in it. Wood is incredibly brittle because when it's underwater, the water breaks down the cell structure of the wood. And so if you bring it up without doing the adequate conservation, it dries out and it will literally crumble. So there's something called PEG, polyethylene glycol, that is used to bulk up that cellular structure of the wood. This is a ship called the Vasa, sank off the coast of Sweden. On its maiden voyage, they recovered it and brought it up in, I think, the early 60s. And it took them 30 years spraying it daily with this stuff to be able to bulk it up. So it is a long, time-consuming, expensive process. So that's when we're starting to think about what we bring up, what we leave, what are you going to do with it once you have it is an important part of the question. It is a lot of money, absolutely. And so again, just metal objects go through something called electrolysis. This is before and after. You can see it's pretty tarnished, but in the after, we can see brighten, patent. We get a lot of information just by doing that cleanup process. And then finally, the last step for all of this, we've done our analyses, done our conservation. The next step is getting information out there, interpreting it. What I'm doing here today is part of that interpretation. But interpretation takes many different forms. And like I said, in some ways, to me, this is the most important part of it, because if you have got the coolest discovery in the world, if you don't tell people about it, it's not really worth anything. So interpretation comes in a number of different ways. One of these are dive slates. These are for divers. And I'll put this up here. You can take a look at this too. But if I am scuba diving for pleasure on this wreck, it basically gives me a little map. Here's where I'm going. Here's the things that I can see, made out of plastic so you can take it underwater with no problem. It's a very, very specific type of interpretation for a very small audience, though. Not everybody in this room is going to go scuba dive on a shipwreck. So one of the most common other areas is museum exhibits. This is from the Wisconsin Maritime Museum out in Manitowoc. If your interest is piqued by all of this stuff, I encourage you to go online. The Museum of Underwater Archaeology is an online-only museum. Full disclosure, I'm on the board of directors, so I don't get any money for it. There's no kickbacks, but we've got a lot of information for about 300 archaeologists from all over the world. About 300 different projects. 300 different people, no, about 300 different people have contributed to projects from literally all over the world. So if you're interested, you can see what a lot of different areas are doing.
Could you repeat that, please? It was what? Underwater?
The Museum of Underwater Archaeology. Sure. And then actually, if you are interested, I have a little bit old, but the URL will still get you there. I have bookmarks. If you're interested, I can pass those out too. And then a lot of times also what you'll see this right here in Wisconsin, maritime trails. If you drive along Lake Michigan in various places, this is the Pilot Island site, so you'll see this signage where you can just go and they will interpret what is right offshore for you. So again, the interpretation is one of the most critical parts of all of this. I have gone way over my 40-minute time, so I apologize for that. But that is pretty much the process of maritime archaeology. And I am happy to answer questions, talk about the gear. You can tell, I'm sure, that I hate talking about this stuff. So,
Join me in thanking Professor Michelle Damien.
Thank you so much. Sorry to go on and on to cut off the Q&A.